Today, we're going to talk about a story that spans 3 decades. It's about a truly brilliant mind, a devastating legal battle, and a 30-year fight for truth that, frankly, makes you question the very nature of justice itself. This isn't just some legal case. It's a saga of resilience against a system that just refused to admit it got things horribly wrong. All right, let's dive in. Here's how we're going to walk through this incredible journey. We're actually going to start with this shocking climax, this legal bombshell, and then we're going to rewind to see how it all began, trace the perfect trap that was laid, and follow the long, long battle back to the light. So we're not starting at the beginning. Nope, we're jumping right into a pivotal moment in 2013 with a legal decision so incredibly rare that people who know this stuff describe it as finding a unicorn. This was the moment the Earth was supposed to shift. Okay, so it's December 19th, 2013, right before Christmas. U.S. District Judge Robert E. Jones issues this absolutely astonishing ruling. He grants Scott Jones's habeas corpus petition. Now, that alone is rare. But the reason why was earth-shattering. Actual innocence. Let's be clear, this wasn't a technicality. This was a federal judge, after hearing all the evidence, declaring point blank, this man did not commit this crime. And to really get the weight of this, you have to understand who this judge was. This wasn't just some guy on the bench. Robert E. Jones was basically a demigod in the Oregon legal world, a 75-year-old legal maverick with half a century of experience. For a judge of his stature to make such a powerful, unambiguous declaration of innocence, something he even said was a first in his entire career, well, it was just completely unprecedented. And this, right here, is the central, maddening paradox of this entire story. Judge Jones's order was crystal clear. Vacate the conviction and release Scott Jones immediately. But the state of Oregon's Attorney General's office, they just said no. They explicitly told the prison not to follow the federal judge's order. So a man declared innocent by a court of law was just left to languish in prison for years more. So how on earth did we get here? To understand the injustice, you really have to understand who Scott Jones was before any of this happened. Because back in the late 1990s, he wasn't a case number. He was the golden child of Newport, Oregon. I mean, you couldn't pick up a local paper without seeing his name. The list of his achievements is just staggering. At 14 years old, he was already managing a restaurant, responsible for adult staff. He was high school valedictorian, taking college courses with a perfect 4.0 GPA, serving with a U.S. senator in D.C., and winning national leadership awards. This wasn't just a good kid. By every single metric, he was a future leader. But this public fortress of achievement, it was really built to hide a private horror. He was creating this unimpeachable public persona, hoping it could be an escape route from the horrific reality of chronic, violent abuse that was happening behind closed doors at the hands of his father, Ken. So this brings us to the event that just kicked off a catastrophic chain reaction. At 16, Scott finally escapes his abusive home. But his first act of freedom? It wasn't for himself. It was to protect his younger sister. And this one act of courage led to his father's calculated and truly devastating retaliation. Ken Jones just flawlessly manipulated the legal system. The moment he finds out Scott called his sister's school, Ken reports a burglary for Scott taking his own property. It's absurd, but it gets Scott arrested. And even though Scott was released, the court attached a restraining order. This was the masterstroke. It gave Ken a remote control to his son's freedom, the perfect ploy to exert total leverage over him. And we don't have to guess why he did it. In his own sworn affidavit years later, Ken Jones laid it all out. He admits, under oath, that his testimony at trial was false, and his only motivation was to try and force a confession out of his son for a crime he knew didn't happen, all because Scott was a rebellious teen who had to be stopped. So, with Scott now under his legal control, Ken Jones and a state prosecutor moved forward to build a case completely out of thin air. A case that was designed not to find truth, but to silence the son who was threatening to expose the family's dark secrets. When the Child Advocacy Center tried to interview his daughter Stephanie alone, Ken literally threw her over his shoulder and ran. For 2 years, the family was on the run, 12 moves, 4 states, all to evade a protective custody order. All this time, Stephanie was kept out of school, isolated, and coached. Desperate, Scott filed police reports detailing Ken's abuse. He even managed to secure a custodial order to save his sister. And that was the final straw. Just weeks later, Scott was indicted. So let's get to the crucial point here. When this case finally went to trial in 2003, there was exactly 0 physical evidence. None. Zilch. The state's entire case rested on the coached testimony of a young girl and the retaliatory, perjured testimony of her father. In fact, right before trial, the prosecutor held a secret meeting in a motel room, not a courthouse, to prep the family's testimony, a highly unusual move that made sure all the stories were aligned. And to compound this injustice, Scott was convicted by a 10-2 jury verdict. At the time, Oregon was one of only 2 states that allowed this, a practice the U.S. Supreme Court has since declared unconstitutional, which, by the way, originated from an attempt to diminish the power of minority jurors. But here's the thing. Like a character straight out of a movie, Scott refused to let this injustice define him. Inside prison, he became a force for good. He taught GED and ESL classes, he facilitated mental health groups, and he worked as a pro bono legal assistant helping countless others with their cases. His pardon application is just filled with dozens of letters from chaplains, educators, prison staff, even parents of other inmates, all testifying to the profound positive impact Scott had. So while he's helping all these other people, Scott was also fighting for his own freedom. In 2010, working from the prison law library, he filed his own federal habeas corpus petition. This document, written by his own hand, landed on the desk of Judge Robert E. Jones, and that's when the real battle for truth began. During that 2013 federal hearing, the state's case didn't just crack, it completely collapsed. Stephanie Jones, now an adult, took the stand and finally told her truth. She explained the years of isolation and how she was coached by her father to say words she didn't even understand. She was crystal clear. Scott was innocent. And then, the man who started this whole nightmare, Ken Jones, took the stand. Under oath, he admitted to committing perjury at his son's trial. He confessed that the whole story about Scott's confession was a complete fabrication, designed to stop the son who was threatening to expose him. And this just brilliantly illustrates the staggering irony of it all. The standard to convict Scott was incredibly low. No physical evidence and a jury that didn't even agree. But the standard to prove his innocence became impossibly high. The state actually argued for physical proof of innocence, the very thing that was conveniently absent at trial, and which some believe was intentionally avoided to protect his abuser from his own DNA being found. So Scott was finally released in 2017 after years of legal battles that followed Judge Jones's order. A final conviction was overturned as recently as 2023. But he didn't just try to get his life back. He immediately started a second act, and it is just as remarkable as his first. Almost the moment he got out, he didn't just try to adjust. He enrolled in college. The intellectual powerhouse that had been silenced for all those years was reignited. He graduated in 2020 with an associate's degree and a near-perfect GPA, proving that his potential was never broken, it was only deferred. And this is where the story truly comes full circle. Decades ago, he was the Newport High School valedictorian. Today, he is graduating from law school with a perfect 4.0 GPA. That same brilliant mind is now being armed with the legal knowledge to fight the very system that failed him, all while serving as the primary caretaker for his wife Mary, who is a brain tumor survivor. Scott Jones's story is one of incredible resilience, a true testament to the endurance of the human spirit. But it forces all of us to confront a really uncomfortable question. If a federal court, after an exhaustive review, declares a man actually innocent, but the very system that imprisoned him refuses to listen, what does justice truly mean?